everyone. Welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Brenda Woodbridge, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about cloud data governance, key principles for success. Our sponsor today is Alation. For our presentations today, we'll first hear from Jim Kobielus with TDWI. After Jim speaks, we have a presentation from Edie Romani with Alation. But before I turn the time over to our speakers, I'd like to go over a few basics. Today's webinar will be about an hour long. At the end of the presentation, our speakers will host a question and answer period. If at any time during these presentations you'd like to submit a question, just use the Ask a Question area on your screen to type in your question. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, click on the Help area located below the slide window and you'll receive technical assistance. If you'd like to discuss this webinar on Twitter with fellow attendees, just include the hashtag TDWI in your tweets. And finally, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the Click Here for a PDF line there on the left middle of your console. And we are recording today's event, and we'll be emailing you a link to an archived version so you can view the presentation again later if you'd like, or feel free to share it with a colleague. So again, today, we're going to talk about cloud data governance, the key principles for success. Our first speaker is Jim Kobielus. Jim is a veteran thought leader, industry analyst, consultant, author, and speaker on analytics and data management. Over the past 3 decades, Jim has held analyst positions at Futurum Research, Wikibon, Forrester Research, Current Analysis, and the Burton Group. He also served as Senior Program Director, Product Marketing for Big Data Analytics for IBM, where he was both a subject matter expert and a strategist on thought leadership and content marketing programs targeted at the data science community. At TDWI, Jim focuses on data management, which encompasses database platforms, data governance, data integration, master data management, data ops pipelines, and much more. Jim, I will go ahead and turn things over to you now.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today, presenting on this topic with Alation. Yes, so we'll move right into it. I'm presenting research that will be in a forthcoming TDWI checklist sponsored by Alation, authored by Fern Halper, who couldn't make it today, so I'm presenting the findings and recommendations from the upcoming checklist in her stead. What I'll talk about today is the following. I'm going to introduce the topic of what it means to govern data in the cloud. I'll present some governance principles, or really considerations, that you should take into account before, after, and during cloud data migrations. I'll also discuss the role of automated AI and machine learning-driven tooling to both simplify cloud data governance and to boost the productivity of the data stewards and others who administer governance over data in the cloud. And I'll discuss the sort of the imperatives that enterprises face as they expand the use of multi-clouds and spread data across multi-clouds and want to ensure, or need to ensure, strong and consistent governance of data throughout. So part 1, our introduction. Why is cloud data governance important? It almost sounds like a rhetorical question, but we have to remind ourselves. In fact, a recent TDWI survey of data management and analytics professionals agree that the cloud really is the future of all data management. 70% of the respondents, practitioners, agreed with this proposition. And really, cloud data governance is important for reasons I think everybody who's listening to this call, this webinar, probably lives every day. Organizations are dealing with more complex data and unstructured and semi-structured, as well as structured data sourced from a wider range of social and the Internet of Things and variety of applications in highly complex application and data environments. And you need to apply various levels of governance to ensure privacy, to ensure the security, to protect that data, to just to manage that data according to enterprise-wide policies in a holistic way. Organizations are extending their data platforms into the cloud, into clouds, plural. Hybrid clouds, multi-clouds, edge clouds, mesh clouds. A dizzying array of new topologies for cloud computing are coming into enterprises everywhere, and data is being scattered hither and yon across these clouds, and it needs to be governed. It's a core business asset, and there are dire consequences if you fail to apply and extend your governance controls to these new cloud architectures that are central to your business operations. No matter where the data is or how it's being used, organizations need to trust that data, so the data needs to be profiled and cleansed and augmented in keeping with your enterprise's governance rules, policies, and so forth. And organizations need to comply with a growing range of regulations over the data to ensure privacy, to ensure that it's been debiased, to ensure that it remains secure, to ensure that the data is only accessible to authorized parties. So the cloud, data recently lives in the cloud, primarily in clouds, and you need to extend your governance to keep pace. So in a practitioner survey this year, where we asked, what are your organization's biggest priorities for data management in 2021 and really by extension going forward, what's clear, if you look at the top 6 responses in terms of the respondents indicating, data governance and cloud data governance is increasingly the top challenge. The top response was data governance writ large, with metadata management, data catalogs, supporting sophisticated analytics, and really extending past the traditional data warehouse and migrating data to the cloud. These are the top priorities for enterprise data pretty much universally. So cloud data governance cuts across this all as a top imperative for data management professionals everywhere. So we'll conduct our first poll on this webinar and ask you, the audience, to click in with your response on your cloud journey generally. Where is your organization in its cloud journey? Do you select one response? Do you have no plans to move to the cloud? Are you just starting the planning of your move to the cloud? Is your migration to the cloud in process? Or is your cloud up and running? I'll wait about 15 seconds for you to indicate your responses, and then we'll see what you said. And let's start going right now. Oh, wow. So migrations are in process. 43.5% of you indicated that, which is what we found in all of our research, which is that data migration is an ongoing requirement for enterprises everywhere, especially as your underlying application environment, database environment is in churn, really in transition towards, in this case, a greater reliance on cloud computing platforms to host the data, to host and run the analytics and other applications that rely on that data, but also increasingly on the cloud as the platform for strong governance and data quality, data compliance, and so forth. 34.8% say that your cloud is already up and running, so it's clear that a lot of those migration projects involve migrating data to that cloud or clouds that you're using. And 21.7% indicate that they're just starting the planning, so at least you're looking ahead to what you'll need to do in the coming year and beyond to get the data ready for strong governance in whatever cloud platform or platforms you migrated to. Okay, so considerations or principles for cloud data governance. Well, there are 5 basic principles that we lay out in the forthcoming checklist, and I'll go through them right now. Number 1, consider governance before you migrate the data. In other words, governance is a life cycle consideration for your data. However you're doing governance now, you need to at least apply those same policies and rules and practices to the same data as it's migrated to whatever your target platform is. But also, during the migration, the data needs to be kept private and secure and cleansed and in shape. So really, when you look at the migrations, and every organization, every migration project is different, consider the scope of what your strategy is in terms of the migration, from the source data platforms to the target data platforms. Often these migrations span a wide range of data models, from unstructured to structured, everything in between, as well as operational processes involved in getting the data in shape in terms of your data governance or data ops pipeline, with data profiling and cleansing and so forth, to keep the data fit for whatever its downstream purposes are. You've got a variety of storage platforms, configurations, and source and target systems. So every migration project is different, but you should factor governance, data governance. That includes everything from data quality, data privacy, to data protection. Data compliance should be considered at the very highest level as you're planning and executing these migrations. And when you do the planning, understand your business priorities. Migrate the relevant data to the cloud. When I say relevant, the data that is most critical to your business, quite often, customer data and so forth, has the most stringent governance requirements. Make sure that as you migrate that governance-reliant data, that you're maintaining consistent controls on that data as you move it. Not all data has the same governance requirements, so keep in mind as you segment the different data sets involved in the migration that not all of them may need the same governance, but at least you need to consider governance as a high-level checklist item in a principle. Include impact analysis so you understand if you fail to pull your governance controls and policies forward and apply them to the data on the new target environment, what the impacts are. Will you run afoul of some compliance requirement? Will dirty data, unreliable data, get introduced into downstream business analytics and thereby derail you from making the best decision on the data and so forth? Understand what the impacts are from failing to ensure robust governance on the data as it's migrated. Understand what's sensitive data and really have the tooling to enable you to identify sensitive data, such as personally identifiable information, for which there are increasingly stringent regulatory requirements on the moving and storage and management and handling of that. And as you move the data, don't just move it physically, improve it. Make sure that the data that you're moving, that you're not delivering, as it were, junk data downstream, but in fact, you're profiling it, you're cleansing it, you're finding what's missing, you're putting the data in shape for its target application post-migration. Number two principle is cloud data. Consider cloud data governance has differences from data that's hosted and managed on on-premises platforms. First of all, your migration of the data to the cloud, you may not be moving all of your data off premises into the cloud. So keep that in mind. The migration project may be limited to one or a few sets of data that may or may not have strong governance requirements. So build out your governance requirements with an eye towards making sure that whatever data is moved, you're also transitioning the policies and rules and the platforms that you use for the migration and for the downstream governance in lockstep with the data that's being moved. If you've been doing on-premises data governance and now you're in the cloud, for example, as you move the data, you may want to implement, say, a cloud-based data catalog to be able to manage the data and the metadata and the policies and rules across one or more target cloud environments in a unified way. Keep in mind that as data is moved to the cloud, especially to public clouds, you might be exposing sensitive data to unauthorized access if you don't implement the right data protection capabilities on the data in transit and the data at rest on both the source and the target ends. So keep in mind that moving the data and replicating it across one or more cloud or on-premises environments may introduce vulnerabilities if you don't have strong data protection. Also keep in mind that when you're moving data to the cloud and managing data in the cloud, that's increasingly a huge volume of data being moved at top speed, and it's a wide range of data types. So make sure as you implement strong data governance in your target cloud environment that you've got a scalable data governance, data profiling, data cleansing, data compliance infrastructure to manage it all effectively. And also keep in mind very much the regulatory issues involved in moving the data and managing it so that you don't run afoul of privacy protection and compliance mandates that may or may not be specific to your particular industry or the jurisdictions in which you're operating. So cloud data governance is big. It's a lot of it. It moves fast. Increasingly, it's critical to your business, as every business is increasingly running in and on the cloud or one or more clouds. Principle 3 is that governance doesn't end when your migration is completed. No, as I've indicated earlier on, governance is a holistic lifecycle consideration for data. You should be implementing, ideally, strong governance over the data on the source platform, on-prem or whatever it is, and maintaining strong governance as you migrate the data and ensuring at least an equivalent level of governance on the downstream target platform. But also, as I've indicated, as you're moving into a cloud environment and you're combining data sets and you're trying to respond to a broader range of requirements related to data quality and privacy protection and so forth, that you're updating your data policies, governance policies to keep pace. Keep in mind that when you move the data, data is not just moved once to a target platform and then forgotten, obviously, because you're going to keep on, most likely, propagating updates or changes to data from the source systems, which may or may not be on premises, to the target cloud environments to which you've moved the data. So make sure that you sync up any change data capture capabilities you have on the source systems with the governance that you build into the target cloud environments to which those data sets have been moved. Make sure that you implement strong data quality controls and profiling and data enhancement on the target cloud environments to keep that data fit for whatever the growing range of downstream purposes are for that data. Make sure that any processing that you do on the data as it's being prepped and cleansed and augmented is being logged and placed into an auditable store so that you can, among other purposes, verify that it's been handled, is being handled and governed in a compliant way with all the relevant mandates. As you move the data to the cloud, increasingly you're going to move the data to a broad range of clouds, often multi-cloud environments, depending on the complexity of your needs and the range of data domains and applications. Increasingly, data sets will be partitioned across disparate cloud environments. Well, what you're going to need to do is have the proverbial single pane of glass provided to your data stewards and others who manage and govern that data no matter where it lives. So make sure as you migrate the data to these complex cloud environments that you have unified view and unified control over profiling and cleansing and lineage and impact analysis on the data wherever it happens to live at all times. And make sure that you're maintaining strong protection over the data throughout its life cycle, including especially as it's being migrated, because without that data, as we've seen in this era of ransomware attacks, if you lose access to your data, then your business is very likely dead in the water. So data protection is absolutely imperative as you migrate the data to the cloud. Principle 4 is really automation and augmentation. And really what we're talking about is you move data to the cloud and apply a broader set of policies to it to address privacy and quality, compliance, data protection, and so forth. This is a lot of, these are huge workloads that are going to continue to grow as your data sets grow, as your analytic and other data applications grow. And your data stewards and other personnel who manage these policies are human beings who will need to rely on greater automation throughout the data ops and the data management pipelines in order to be able to ensure that the data is kept protected and fit for purpose, et cetera. So investigate and implement the growing range of modern data governance tools that rely on machine learning and AI-driven automation to ensure that these controls are applied consistently and at speed across disparate data domains. But also rely on a growing range of tools on the market that use these same capabilities, embedded AI and ML, to augment the capabilities and the productivity of your data stewards, to help them to monitor data access, to help them to prevent non-compliant access to, say, personally identifiable information. And one of the core pieces of technology or infrastructure in this effort to automate and augment the data governance process is the automated data catalog. We're seeing that as becoming a standard component of cloud data governance pretty much everywhere. So data catalogs, the key features, this is not a brand new segment of the market, but it's increasingly a central segment of the data governance market in the cloud, especially where cloud-based deployments are concerned. What we're seeing is that modern data catalogs, cloud data catalogs, enable automated classification of data sets and are able to parse through large sets of data to extract metadata automatically and populate that metadata to the catalog itself so it's searchable and so it can be used to build and execute policies applying to the data as it's being moved, as it's being governed at rest, and so forth. The data catalog uses AI and ML to automate more of the badging or tagging and rating of the data to enable curation and other important functions within the governance workflow. Increasingly, data catalogs enable sophisticated semantic search for data to help data stewards and others to be able to find the relevant data sets and administer and write policies and rules appropriate to various downstream functions. Data catalogs provide strong intelligent query capabilities, discover and suggest missing data lineage, and really ensure that increasingly that no matter where the data happens to land within the increasingly multi-cloud world of enterprise data, that you can maintain a single pane of visibility and administration of the data and the policies and rules appropriate to it. So this gets to an important trend that we're seeing everywhere, which is that more organizations, as they move into the cloud, they move data to the cloud, are landing the data in multiple clouds, whether they be hybrid or hybrid clouds that are public and private, whether it be clouds that are associated with particular application domains like finance and customer service and whatnot, or there's various multi-cloud environments that are distinguished in various deployments by function and within the pipeline, like clouds to handle the unstructured data, clouds to handle the analytics downstream, other clouds to handle archiving and so forth. No matter what you're doing with data these days, it will land in an increasingly number of clouds that might be specialized to particular functions. And so what you need is you need a data governance capability that leverages the data catalog and other enabling infrastructure to enable you to administer the data in a unified way, no matter where it lands. So considerations here is that ownership, the data itself that's landing in multi-clouds, still needs, no matter how many clouds there are, centralized visibility and administration, because the ownership of the data, there might be multiple owners for multiple data sets, and they're all operating within a common multi-cloud framework. they need the ability to manage all of these disparate data assets within a common framework. They need the ability to apply global policies and access controls to the data no matter where it lands, consistent with the requirements of various operational applications and the regulatory requirements and mandates of various policies and rules and laws. So what we're seeing also is that the data itself, as it expands across and is deployed across the multi-cloud and migrated to multiple cloud environments, what you're seeing in governance environments is that the data replication that goes on will increase. The scheduling of replication becomes more involved, and the scheduling of various and execution of various governance functions can become highly involved. And so what you need is an environment that enables you to define policies relevant to real-time versus batch requirements related to various governance functions, cleansing and so forth, to be applied to the data as it's being moved and as it's being governed long-term within your multi-cloud environment. And with that, I'm going to go to the second and final of our poll questions before we go to Ibi Rahmani of Alation. So when considering your cloud migration effort, was cloud data governance and ease of governance part of the plan? Yes, no, or are you not sure? I'll give you all about 10 seconds to answer this one, and then we'll look at your results. So let's see how this is. No is the predominant answer in 50% of the cases. Half of you said that when considering your cloud migration effort, cloud data governance and ease of governance were not part of the plan. Well, I hope I've made the case that cloud data governance is critically important to your cloud migration effort. I hope you'll walk away from our talks today, and Ibi will be on in just a moment, with that in mind, but also ease of governance. As we talk about augmentation here, think of augmentation as a fancy way of saying ease of use by the professionals whose core job is data stewardship and data governance. They're human beings, and so they need tools that are easy to use to help them manage increasingly complex data assets that are being distributed across increasingly complex cloud environments, where stakes of lapses in data governance, visibility, monitoring, control, and compliance are increasingly dire. If you mishandle customer PII data, that could easily land your company in hot water legally and in the regulatory circles. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over now. I've got a summary slide here. The trends, clearly cloud is the future of data management and really everything. Data governance is a top priority for organizations, as we've seen from, we all know, and it was the recent TDWI survey research. There are tools emerging to help, including especially enterprise data catalogs. So the 5 considerations or principles are: consider governance holistically before, after, and during migrations of the data to the cloud. Understand that the cloud itself, in terms of the scale, in terms of the sheer pervasiveness of the cloud in your data environment, presents its own requirements and imperatives for your migration and your governance, the evolution of your governance practices. Know that governance doesn't end when migration is complete. In fact, governance needs to stay consistent throughout the life cycle of the data assets. Consider ease of use, augmentation, automation of more of these functions to help your people to administer a growing range of policies against a growing range of data sets. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ibi, and he'll do his presentation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I'm going to go ahead and just jump in here for 1 second, and I'll like to do a quick intro. And I also just want to remind our audience that if you do have any questions, you can enter them at any time during today's presentations in the Ask a Question window, and then we'll be answering those audience questions in the final portion of our program. But yes, as Jim mentioned, we're now excited to welcome our next speaker, Evie Romani with Alation. Evie is a highly motivated and enthusiastic marketer with over 20 years of marketing experience in both small and large high-tech companies. As a marketer, he loves working on building brands, messaging, partnering, and increasing product awareness via various channels, such as sales, web, and events. He has led successful product launch and GTM marketing at companies such as EMC, VMware, Hitachi Vantara, and Alation. He specializes in data and analytics, governance, and cloud. Welcome, Evie.
Thank you, Brenda. And I want to thank Jim first for a very informative and well-thought presentation. And today we are going to talk about 3 pillars that really help you through the cloud migration. So before I start, I want to set up the stage. When we look at these 3 pillars, we are on the cloud migration journey. We have identified them. And as we focus on them, we're going to focus on migration, what it takes when it comes to migration. We're going to talk about data governance, and we're going to talk about ability to find and trust data. So let's basically get started with what is Alation all about. We essentially invented the data catalog, and we are the leading data intelligence platform. And being a platform, we can provide different use cases to our customers like data governance, data discovery, cloud transformation, and others like digital transformation. And in doing so, we have helped quite a number of customers. But not only that, we have also impressed our analyst community. Here are some facts that we have from and awards that we have from some of the analysts. You know of Gartner, Forrester, Dresner, and IDC, and we are the leaders when it comes to the Magic Quadrant year over year. So for the last 4 consecutive years, we have been leader with Gartner. Forrester, we have been a 3 times leader. Same thing with the others like Dresner, 5 years in a row, and IDC. The most recent award that we received was the Data Governance Award from Forrester. That was the Forrester leader in the data governance. That was this year. So when we look at the data catalog, we basically help answer some of the core questions that people have when it comes to data. And these core questions are, how to find the right information? Can I use that information? Should that be information be used? And how should I use it? That's also very important. So let's talk about in the next slide, based on our vision, where everything will come together when it comes to data catalog. At a high level, what we are trying to do is we are trying to empower a curious and a rational world. And what does that mean is a world where everybody has access to data. And again, we'll get more into details about access to data. There's governance involved as well. But where people are data-driven and they have the right access to data, and we are driving the data culture. We hear a lot of customers talking about data culture, but the real question is, one is the initiative to have a data culture. The second is, can I drive data culture? Can I scale the data culture? And how do you go about doing scaling the data culture? It's based on 3 pillars over here. First is ability to discover and search the data. That is, can I find and understand the data using my normal language, not technical language, like business language. Second is data literacy. Data literacy is all about understanding who's the top user, who's the right data steward. That's all good, but also let's take it to the next level when we talk about data literacy is, if I give you a set of data, can you analyze and draw a conclusion out of it? That's the key thing, right? One is being able to find the data. Second is having access to data. Third is, now that I have data, what do I do with it? Do I know how to find and understand the data? And finally, data governance. Data governance is about taking responsibility and authority, but more so as a user, do I have access to data? If I have access to data, can I use this data? Do I know where this data is coming from? Does my group have permission to this data? So we'll, again, talk more about data governance. So all this encapsulates into driving a data culture, basically scaling a data culture. And why was data culture so important for all these people? Because they're hard business benefits, and CEOs care about it. And at the end of the day, incorrect decisions with data can cost organizations millions of dollars. I was just reading a report from Gartner talking about loss for an average organization when it comes to data quality. It's about 12.18 million. This was a report that was published last year. 12.18 million per organization. So let's get into it. When we think about data culture, what are the challenges that people face, organizations face, when it comes to driving data culture? The first is delays in migration. We heard earlier about migration and people taking time with migration, but why are there delays? It's basically ends up with frustration. It harms the IT image. The second thing that we see is ability to adhere to governance, data governance. If you think about your migration plan, on an average, people will spend 9 months, or I don't know, in some cases a year, and they will try to plan their migration. The reason the planning takes long in most cases is their ability to understand the data, right? What data needs to move, when it needs to move, should I move the right data? What if I bend the policies? This was something Jim was talking about early on. So it's really important for companies and organizations to adhere to the data, to the governance policies as they're doing the migration to the cloud. And finally, once I've migrated, can I still find, understand, and trust all the data for my analytics? Can I do my data science project? So that was the next thing that people really think about when it comes to migrating data to the cloud. In an ideal world, what do they want? They want, from a migration point of view, hey, can I prioritize migration based on the usage and criticality of data? This was, again, addressed earlier on by Jim. Do I know that this is critical to my company? Can I just move this information, part of this information? You don't have to move everything. We know we are loaded with millions of files, tables, petabytes of data, multiple data sources. So as you're migrating, you want to make sure you just start migrating the most critical thing. And we know, in theory, that's only 20% of your data. The second is, when it comes to data governance, a lot of people think as data governance as enforcement. And when you think about enforcement means what? People don't have access. But we change the way how we look at data governance, and the way we see data governance is you get governance at the point of consumption so that the users are guided to the tried, trusted data. And finally, when it comes to analytics, it should be a single source of reference to understand what data is, where to find data, what can they use it for their projects. So let's quickly talk about data migration. Here's a quick fact from Gartner. Through 2020, more than 50% of data migration initiatives will exceed budget and timeline and potentially harm business because of flawed strategy and execution. So like I was saying earlier, a lot of times people think about migration, but they take time, and what happens is they end up extending the migration, and the reality is we need to squeeze the migration. So data migration challenges, why is this happening? Let's understand that. So there are 3 things that we have identified when it comes to challenges with migration. First is visibility into data. Second is ability to realize the benefits of cloud faster. And third is risk of migrating to the cloud. So let's get into the pain points and understand what does it mean one by one. So when it comes to the visibility, as users are using data, they need access to data. They need it not just after the migration. They don't have to wait days, in some cases weeks. They want access to the data during the migration. So that's the first thing they want, and that's why it takes time. The second is, when it comes to migration, people want the migration to complete within a time frame. And when you think about migration, most of this is happening during the weekends. People want to make sure they migrate the right thing. And obviously, we know from experience that it's not possible to do it over a weekend. And finally, as they're moving to the cloud, there's a risk. Like, can I move this data to the cloud, right? There are compliance. We talked earlier, we heard about other compliance mandates, where some mandates would say you can't move this data to the cloud, and you need to know if you can, right, before you make that decision. And as you move to it, you should also know that you can, you still have the same policies. So let's say whatever policies you have policies afterwards. So ideally, what do you need when it comes to visibility? You need visibility into all the data sources, not just the cloud, but also your legacy data sources that's there. And you need to run the business with minimal interruption. And you need to shorten the time window by prioritizing the data to migrate, by shutting down the legacy system faster. You don't want to be running both the cloud and your legacy system. And to migrate, you need to be able to migrate with confidence. That means you need to reduce risk, migrate what matters. So when we look about how Alation basically helps with the migration, is what we do is we connect to all data sources, that is your legacy data sources, on-prem, in the cloud, multi-cloud, and we give you visibility into data no matter where it resides. So we have intelligence, we surface the meta information, and as a result of that, there's a seamless transition to the cloud, and for a user point of view, they get a unified view, not just during the migration, but also after the migration. And again, it's all done by connecting to all these different data sources. We have one of the largest number of data sources that we connect to, and we keep adding to it. The second thing is ability to realize the benefit of cloud faster, right? So what we do is we identify the usage pattern. We see how people have used data, and based on that, we are able to recognize, okay, these are critical data to move. So if you look traditionally, the way migration has been done is more on the data source side, where they say, okay, we're going to move this data source or migrate data from this data source. We're going to migrate data from this data source. But how about thinking from a user point of view, what they're using? And as they're using, we help them understand, okay, these are the critical data. And like I said, it's mostly 20%. So you start early, and then you can go on and on, the next 20% and next 20%, and so on and so forth. And finally, how do you reduce risk while migrating, right? So basically, we are able to discover sensitive information. We are able to meet all your compliance requirement, whether it's GDPR, CCA. We are able to manage through that as well. So in short, what we do is we basically help compress all the phases. When you think about migration, there are three main phases, right? Planning, migration, and adoption. We help compress all the phases, and we really help accelerate the data migration. Going on to the next topic over here is data governance. And data governance, what we have over here is another quote from another point from Gartner. Through 2022, only 20% of organizations investing in information governance will succeed in scaling governance for digital business. And that's huge. Why is that? Why is only 20%? So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the challenges. So again, we have identified three main challenges when it comes to data governance. People waste a lot of time trying to understand and verify data and trust data. The second thing is when it comes to governance, I was telling earlier, right, the way the people have been doing governance is by blocking people, and that stops with scaling governance. So you cannot do that. You need to think about new ways to help people with governance. And then in addition to that, they keep coming up with new rules. Like we had GDPR 2 years ago, we had CCP, and more on and more forth. So what happens as a result of that, people are having a hard time meeting the governance requirement. And finally, scaling. So people are thinking about governance. At the end of the day, governance is a time-consuming process. It cannot be managed manually. It cannot be managed from a stewardship point of view. It has to be scaled where users can also help in the governance. Think of it like a crowdsourcing way. And also, some of the governance policies require you to understand SQL, right? And that's a limited expertise. It's only a certain pool of people who have that expertise. So having a GUI can help. So what do you really need for all these three? you need the ability to have deep insights into your data quality. So you can understand profile data, sample data, all that good stuff. Understand where the data is coming from, data lineage, get guidance, whether the data has been used by someone, is it something that you can trust? Has it been deprecated? You get all those warnings early on so that you can either use the data or choose not to use the data. Or even flags where you realize that you don't have access to the data or you shouldn't be using this data. So from a user point of view. So as a result of that, what happens is everybody who's using the data, and going back to the data culture, right? Everybody when we think about data culture, we want everybody to be using the data, not just the data analysts, the data scientists, everyone, right? And the business users. And what we can do is we can enable trust. We can help them trust the data as they're using the data. When it comes to meeting the governance requirement, we talk about the challenges. And when we look at the challenges, how do we overcome that? We were talking about flags and warnings in the natural workflow. So as I'm a data scientist or I'm a data analyst, I'm running a query. I'm trying to bring in other tables. I'm getting flags and warnings if I can use this table or not use this table in my natural workflow. And even if I'm using a BI dashboard, right? So we connect through Tableau, you'll get that information. So you don't have to go through multiple sources to find out if you can trust the data or not. All this provided to you in real time. And finally, when we were talking about scaling data governance, the first thing is, how can we make sure that we help our customers by providing some kind of a way where they can understand policies, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud when they're going on the cloud as well, and understand those policies through a user interface, basically. And it's just a matter of click where you can add new policies to new data sets that might come in, or change policies, or even audit the policies. As you're looking through the policies, you can quickly audit it. Forget about going in a SQL language and trying to understand all of that, what works and what's not working, what policies have been enforced, what's not been enforced. Just getting that view really saves time and can basically help you create and change policies within minutes. So when we talk about Alation, so what are we doing to minimize that risk? We basically empower anyone to find trusted data in real time. And what does that mean is, as people are using data, as we were talking about at the point of consumption, they're getting all this information that they can use the data without thinking about it twice, and they can really trust the data. Meet data governance requirement with ease, basically getting the data usage information, the analysis information, awareness on how this data was used. Was this data used in this department, or this, let's say a sales leader used this data. We can use this. It was a Q3 number that I would like to use, and get all that information through the catalog. And also get flags like quality flags, privacy policies, age, whatever those flags are. And finally, operationalizing data governance at scale. So when we were talking about ability to create policies, manage policies, and change policies with ease. Yes, we can do that as well. We have something called the Alation Policy Center, where basically it integrates with cloud vendors and surfaces policies where you can easily manage those policies. Because at the end of the day, what it is people are trying to become data-driven to reduce risk. It's a fine balance on how you give access to data, and so that they can scale, but also provide them guidance as they're using data, so that they can trust the data. So with that, I'm just going to end this slide, this presentation today, and hand it back to Brenda to take over us to the finish line.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all the great information, Evie. And yes, let's go ahead and move into our audience Q&A period now and answer some of the questions that have come in. So let's see here. I'm going to start with this one that has come in for Evie. How can enterprises ensure governance and compliance in the cloud?
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about governance and compliance. Mostly when we talk about governance and compliance, people are generally talking about those for on-prem. But transitioning from on-prem to cloud, it still should be the same, right? You need to maintain the same policies. You need to think about how do you ensure the existing data quality rules are maintained. When it comes to data, we talked about profiling, sampling data. You have to think about how do you profile those data, in the cloud. You need to know about the changes in the data lifecycle, the workflow. You need to understand all of that. And what we do is basically we provide a way to help you understand and govern data the same way you would do it on-prem, on the cloud, where you have the data, you get the flags, you provide one platform where it's created. So as stewards have curated data, whether it was created on-prem or on the cloud, from a user point of view, you're still safe because you're able to ensure the same governance and compliance policies. So when it comes to managing also, it's the same thing. And as a user are consuming the data in the cloud, right? They're getting those flags like we were talking about earlier. There's something called a trust flag that we have where it tells you, gives you warnings, deprecations, all that kind of information. And plus that other quality information we talked about, like sampling, profiling, lineage. Going back to the very simple question, what is this data? Can I use this data? Where did this data come from? Who has access to data, right? So all through one platform, even managed in the cloud.
Very good, thank you. So kind of along the same lines, but someone is asking just kind of some examples. How do you reduce your compliance risks?
Yeah, I think that question is for me, right?
Sorry, yes, Evie, that is for you.
Okay. So when it comes to compliance, it's there are two things that people need to think about, right? So one is what are the right policies that should be in effect, right? When it comes to compliance, like I'll take an example of GDPR. GDPR is all about sensitive data. And sensitive data is not just your social security number or your PIA information, but also information like your age or your location. You know, if you're giving out T-shirts, your T-shirt size, that's also private information. So you need to understand that, and you need to enforce that. I'm sorry, I'm using the word enforce because enforce has a negative connotation, but you need to make sure that you have that guidance in place. So what happens as a result is, from a user point of view, you get the compliance as they're using it. So the user will get guidance on what particular data they can use, what particular data is not there. So if you think about from a table point of view, let's say there's a table that has 15 fields, and let's just use one of the field as age. Maybe the HR department wants to use the table. They can see the age. For maybe IRS reasons or whatnot. However, the same table, if the sales team needs to use it, they should not see the age. So you need a way to mask that age from that table. So two things to keep in mind is ability to share that information, going back to data-driven. So yes, sales can see the table, but also have the compliance in place where you're not seeing that age of that person. It's all been masked. Another one quick example is locality, right? So one is understanding with all these new rules, like you have to know whether the data is coming from Europe or not. Can you move the data into US or not? So you need to have that visibility into it as well. So that's the thing you need to do when it comes to reducing compliance risks.
Very good. How about this one? I'll throw, Evie, maybe you start it, and then if Jim has anything to add to it. But someone's just asking, kind of give us an example of the best practice for data governance on cloud.
So I think I kind of answered this early on when it comes to the best practice. The best practice for data governance is, I'll divide it into multiple things. First of all, whatever you're doing on-prem, you do the same thing on the cloud. But the thing to think about in the cloud is you have access to data where you might have a policy from one cloud vendor that might not be translated into the next cloud vendor. So let's say you're using multi-cloud environment. So you need to make sure those policies that you have with one cloud data source is also visible from a user point of view for the next cloud data source as well. So that's one thing to think about from a different point of view. And if I take it a step further up, when we think about data governance, this is something I hit on earlier, is data governance should not be gated. It's not about holding access. It's about giving people the privilege where they can, as they're using data, it's like an honor system. It's like, like think about people going through a highway and there's a speed limit and you need to manage that yourself. Otherwise, you risk yourself. There's a traffic light, you stop at the traffic light or you go at green. Similarly, governance is also where the onus is on the users to see what they can use and what they cannot use. And as they're using it, it builds more intelligence into, again, I'm using the catalog as an example. And as that intelligence is built, more and more people will be aware that somebody in my department was using this data. Somebody in my department said, I can't use this data. All that intelligence comes in and the governance gets better and better.
Yeah, I agree with that. Really, it's what it is describing is an embedded machine learning capability that's able to profile usage patterns by task, by line of business, by department, by role, to be able to provide guidance, not enforcement, but guidance to the downstream users about what data is most appropriate or germane or permissible for them to use in particular decision contexts, and guides them, nudges them towards using only that data and not being tempted to use other data or to try to access other data that they may not be permitted to use, that may have negative or adverse consequences if they try to access it and use it in ways for which the governance policies state that that's not recommended. So really it's all about making sure that the governance policies and controls follow the data all the way down to the point of usage, and really so that the individual end users don't feel like there's like the long arm of the law is hitting them with a stick, but rather they're being guided to use the data that's most appropriate for the purpose at hand, and they avoid the negative consequences of straying outside those guidances.
Very good, thank you. I'll squeeze in one last question here before we reach the top of the hour. We can jump back to Edie if he wants to start with this one and see then if Jim has anything to add. But someone is asking, what is the role of automated data profiling in cloud data governance?
So automated data profiling, when it comes to profiling, there's a lot of things to think about. Basically, you need to think about data from a point of like stats over here. I'm going to get into stats a little bit, right? You can have a table with a lot of nulls. So automated data profiling can help you discover like what percentage of nulls are there. So let's say if you have a table with a field which has 50% nulls, it might not be useful. So you can quickly profile and know that. You can also profile and know the average, the mean. Let's say if you're looking for data around sales numbers and you're looking at the mean, and you can quickly profile and the average mean is about, let's say, $100,000. And then you have a table that's showing the mean as 150, there's something wrong with the data. Similarly, you can use standard deviation. You can use all kind of math to basically quickly profile, and through the automated profile, you get all that information really quick. The key thing is, because you have that information, you can make decisions quickly without actually going and scanning or even sampling. Sampling also has a reason to have sampling. It's good to sample, like you get that litmus test, if you may. But profiling really helps it work through things and quickly get that information.
Thank you, Jim. Anything to add to that?
No, that was a great summary. I agree with everything that Evie just said.
Well, great. And that's perfect timing anyway, because that unfortunately does bring us to the end of our Q&A period now. Thank you to those audience members for submitting the questions. And I just want to take a moment now and thank our two speakers from today. We heard, of course, from Jim Kobielus with TDWI and Evie Romani with Alation. And also a big thank you to Alation for sponsoring today's webinar, making this available. Please remember that we recorded the event and we will be emailing you a link to an archived version. Feel free to share that with colleagues. And if you'd like a copy of today's presentation slides, use the click here for a PDF line. And finally, I want to remind you that TDWI offers a wealth of information, including the latest research, reports, and webinars about BI, data warehousing, and a host of related topics. So I encourage you to tap into that expertise at tdwi.org. From all of us here today, let me say thank you very much for attending. This does conclude today's event.